What if I told you your travel budget could last 2 or even 3 times longer without making more money? I've been traveling without income for about 9 months now, and over that time, I started finding different ways to travel that ended up stretching my budget much further than I expected. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly what those are and how to use them to make your money last a lot longer while you travel. Most people already know that accommodation is one of the biggest expenses while traveling, so the default solution is to try to spend less on it, cheaper hotels or hostels or smaller places further out of the city, and that's usually where people stop, even though that's not where the real impact is. What's made the biggest difference for me wasn't just paying less here and there, it was realizing that there are completely different ways to live while you're traveling, and each one changes what your day-to-day costs actually look like. And once I started paying attention to that, I started making different choices about where I stayed. One of those choices for me was homestays. A homestay is where you live in someone's home with meals included, similar to renting a room in a shared house on Airbnb, but it's more structured. There are set meal times, there's more interaction, and sometimes there's other people staying there as part of the same experience. These work really great when you're staying somewhere longer than a week and you want more routine or a taste of local life. A lot of people do these through language programs. When I was in Guatemala, I did a homestay while I was attending a Spanish school in Antigua. I paid about $160 a week, and that included a private room, a private bathroom, 3 meals a day, 6 days a week, plus filtered water. You could even go cheaper if you were okay with a shared bathroom. So instead of just paying for a place to stay, a large part of my daily expenses were also covered. I ended up doing that for about 6 weeks, and then I booked an Airbnb for 2 weeks after that just to have a little more privacy and independence. Altogether, I spent about $1,500 for 2 months of accommodation, with 6 of those weeks including food. Before this trip, I had planned to spend around $3,000 a month. So that's a savings of roughly $4,500 just from this one decision. And that makes a very real difference in how long my budget can last. So if you're considering something like this, look at the full picture. What's included? How many meals? What kind of room setup? And just as important, is it something you'd actually enjoy for a period of time? Because this works best when it fits the kind of experience you actually want to have, not just because it's cheaper. Another way I've been able to lower my cost of living while traveling is by staying in ashrams. Ashrams are typically spiritual communities where you live on site, meals are included, and there's a set daily schedule of classes, practices, and shared routines. When I was in India, I tried two very different ones. The first was in Rishikesh, and it was more traditional and structured. It was quieter, more strict, and focused on things like meditation, hatha yoga, and philosophy classes. Paid around $18 a night for a non-AC private room with a private bathroom, and that included meals every day plus all of the activities. So again, it wasn't just accommodation. A big part of my day-to-day life was already covered. My days were full, which meant I really wasn't spending much money outside of that environment. The second ashram I stayed in was in Goa, and it was a completely different experience. It was much more relaxed, it was more social, and honestly, it felt closer to something like a summer camp. There were things like art classes, dance and movement classes, group walks to beautiful viewpoints, and yoga on the beach. And a lot of the time we'd go out together for ecstatic dancing or exploring the beach or surrounding towns. So it still had structure and meals included, but it felt a lot more flexible. I stayed there for about a month, and while I did start to burn out on the structure towards the end and go more off campus, it still saved me a lot of money, especially in the beginning. And that's really how I try to approach planning accommodation. It's not about doing something like this for months on end if it doesn't feel good. It's about using it for a period of time where it makes sense and letting that time where you're spending less balance out other parts of your trip. That's where the impact comes from. Because when your accommodation, meals, and a lot of your daily activities are already included, your overall spending naturally drops without you having to constantly think about it. But it does come with trade-offs. There are expectations, schedules, and a different kind of environment than typical travel. For example, we had a daily curfew of 9 p.m., which limited what we could do at night. So this really only works if it aligns with what you want in that point in your trip. If you're looking for freedom and flexibility, this might not feel like the right fit. But if you're open to something more structured, or you want to focus on something specific like yoga or meditation, it can be a really effective way to lower your cost of living for a while. Another cost-saving experience for me was the Camino de Santiago. If you're not familiar, the Camino is a long-distance route across Spain where you walk from town to town each day and stay along the way. It's a modern-day pilgrimage, and people do it for everything from religious or spiritual reasons to personal reflection, a physical challenge, or just the experience. I completed it in the fall of 2025 and spent 37 days walking across Spain. The Camino is another example of a trip where the structure naturally keeps your cost lower. Most of the time, you're staying in albergues instead of hotels, and albergues are similar to hostels. They're usually simple shared accommodations set up for people specifically walking the Camino. But one thing I didn't realize before going is that there are also a lot of affordable private options along the way. Things like small pensions, private rooms in albergues, and even places like convents. So you're not limited to dorms if you don't want to be, and the prices are still relatively low compared to typical travel. Your day has a clear purpose. You're just walking to your next stop. There's no transportation costs. Your meals are much simpler, and the food is actually pretty affordable, especially if you're picking up things like lunch or snacks from the grocery store instead of eating out for every meal. And your entertainment is the experience itself, so you're not spending the same way you would in a city where every day starts with deciding where to go, what to do, and where to eat. On the Camino, a lot of that just doesn't come up. So while albergues are obviously cheaper than hotels or private apartments, the bigger point is that the whole setup of this experience makes spending less feel more natural. You don't have to be unusually disciplined. The environment is already doing some of the work for you, and that's something worth paying attention to when you're deciding where to stay. Some types of travel make overspending easier, and others keep your spending lower. And when you're trying to stretch a budget, that difference matters. So when you're evaluating whether something is affordable, don't just look at the price of the bed. Pay attention to the kind of spending the overall experience is likely to lead to. And once you start looking at it that way, another way to bring costs down is through exchange-based stays. Instead of paying for accommodation, you're doing something in return for a place to stay, like volunteering or house sitting. So for that period of time, your accommodation cost is either reduced or completely eliminated. House sitting through Trusted Housesitters can be a really good option for free accommodation. I've done this a few times and had really great experiences. Trusted Housesitters is a platform where you stay in someone's home in exchange for taking care of their pets. It's international, and you can filter based on things like location, type of animal, and length of stay. If you're curious about that, I'll put a discount link in the description so you can look into it. Another option is work exchange programs through platforms like Worldpackers or Workaway. These are platforms that connect travelers with hosts around the world who offer free or reduced cost accommodation in exchange for help. In those cases, you're usually helping for a few hours a day for a set number of days a week in exchange for accommodation and sometimes meals. That could be at a farm or eco-village, animal shelter, or with a community project like a school or church. I haven't actually done one of these yet, but I do have one coming up. I'll be volunteering at a dog rescue in Peru where I'll be working a few hours a day, 5 days a week, in exchange for discounted accommodation and meals. And then later in the year, I'm planning to spend 2 months in Greece working at a cat sanctuary with a similar setup in exchange for free accommodation. For me, these opportunities make sense because I love animals and I'm interested in getting more experience in rescue work. That part is really important because, again, this option only really works if the exchange is something you actually want to be doing. If it's going to make you miserable, there's not much point in extending travel just to feel stuck somewhere you don't enjoy. I've also met people who help at hostels or retreats or surf camps in exchange for a place to stay. Things like working at reception or organizing events or teaching classes like yoga. Same idea, just a different environment. Before committing, it's worth looking really closely at what's expected. How many hours a week are you working? What kind of work is it? What's included? Are you getting a private room or sharing a space? And is the location somewhere you actually want to be? It also helps to read reviews or talk to someone who's done it before if you can, because some of these setups sound great but can be more demanding than they first appear. Another version of this is seasonal work, which is a little different because you're often earning money as well. I met someone who would pick fruit for a few months a year, and that funded the next 6 months of her travel. It's not something I've done myself, but it's another way that people make long-term travel work. Across all of these, the pattern is the same. You're replacing the biggest expense for a period of time, and that's what allows your overall budget to stretch further. So if you're trying to apply this, the shift isn't just finding cheaper places to stay. It's deciding where each type of stay actually fits into your trip, because each one works best in a different situation. A homestay might make sense when you're staying somewhere longer or learning something. An ashram works when you want structure or a reset. The Camino works because the entire trip is built around the lifestyle. And something like house sitting or a work exchange makes sense when you're willing to trade time for a lower cost of living. So instead of trying to make one approach work for your entire trip, it's about knowing when to use each one. And that also means not everything has to be the cheapest option. Sometimes it makes sense to spend a bit more in the right places. And when I do, I usually choose co-living accommodations. It's a setup where you have your own room and bathroom, but you're sharing shared living spaces like the kitchen, laundry, and co-working areas with other people. It's kind of like a more comfortable version of a hostel, usually with digital nomads or people working remotely. I've stayed with the same company Outsite in both Madeira and Oaxaca and have had great experiences with them. They have locations all over the world, and the setups are really consistent, so you know what you're getting when you book. If you're curious about Outsite, I'll leave a discount link in the description for $50 off your first booking. For a reference point, I spent about $1,400 for 35 nights here in Oaxaca, which isn't cheap, but it's less than I'd pay for rent in a lot of places like the US or Europe. And again, even though it's not the cheapest option, you have opportunities to save in other ways. Cooking more, doing laundry at home, and just spending time with people in the house instead of constantly going out. It really comes back to the mix. The practical way to use all of this is to stop viewing accommodation as one category with one solution. It's not. It's more like a menu of options, and each one changes your costs in different ways. Think about how to mix different types of stays depending on where you are and what you want out of that part of the trip. This isn't about making every month as cheap as possible. It's about having enough lower cost stretches that your overall average starts to shift. And that's what extends your timeline. If you want to apply this, here's how I would approach it. First, figure out what your trip would cost if you paid full price for accommodation the entire time. Use real numbers based on the places you actually want to go. Second, look for specific parts of your trip where a different approach would fit naturally. Not everywhere, just see where it makes sense. Third, compare your total cost of living, not just the nightly rate. Think about food, transportation, and how this setup affects your daily spending. Fourth, design your trip as a mix. Different places can serve different purposes. Some can be lower cost and more structured, and others can be more flexible and more expensive. The goal is to shape your overall average on purpose. And finally, think in terms of time, not just money. A lower cost stretch isn't just money saved, it's time gained. More time before you need income again. That was one of the biggest shifts for me. I wasn't just saving money, I was extending how long I could actually stay out here. And that's really the point. When your biggest expense starts getting reduced, bundled, or replaced for parts of your trip, your overall costs start to drop in a meaningful way. That's how the same amount of money can last a lot longer than you expect. And that's why two people with similar budgets can end up with completely different timelines. If you're serious about traveling longer like this, I've made other videos that break down how to plan it, what to expect, what to pack, and how to make it work in real life. So make sure you're subscribed and I'll point you to the next one to watch.